Hi, hello again. As I mentioned in my previous lecture, hemostasis is composed of two stages, the primary and the secondary. The primary stage is involved in the production of the platelet plug, which has been discussed initially. This is the secondary stage, which is involved in the production of fibrin or the blood clot. So in the secondary hemostasis, it could use either the intrinsic or the extrinsic pathway, which eventually will use the common pathway. Coagulation starts in the extrinsic pathway if the trauma to the endothelium is external. In this case, the blood is exposed to the extravascular tissue, which is rich in tissue factor. It is the tissue factor here which activates factor 7 to factor 7A, which goes on to activate factor 10 to factor 10A in the presence of cofactor 8A. It stops there. That is where the extrinsic pathway stops to meet with the intrinsic pathway. It is there where they could both use the common pathway. That is not at the end of it. That is just where it stops in order to meet with the intrinsic pathway. Now, coagulation starts in the intrinsic pathway this time if the trauma to the endothelial cell is internal. If it is internal, it compromises the extracellular matrix, thus exposing the collagen. The collagen in the intrinsic pathway this time is the one that stimulates or activates factor 12 to factor 12A, which acts as a catalyst to activate factor 11 to factor 11A, which goes on to activate factor 9 to factor 9A, which acts as a catalyst to activate factor 10 to factor 10A. Now, that is in the presence of factor 5A. That is where it stops as well, because that is where the intrinsic and the extrinsic pathway meets in order to become one pathway. Now they will use the common pathway. Both stops in factor 10 activated to factor 10A. Now in the common pathway, it starts in the activated factor 10A. The factor 10A here continues to activate factor 2 this time. Factor 2 is also known as the prothrombin. It activates factor 2 to factor 2A, which is also known as the thrombin. Now, in order to avoid confusion, I will be using the term prothrombin instead of factor 2, and I'll be using the word thrombin instead of factor 2A. So starting from the common pathway, the activated factor 10A activates prothrombin to thrombin. However, factor 10 as well requires the presence of factor 5 as a cofactor in activating prothrombin to thrombin. Thrombin, on the other hand, will activate fibrinogen, which is factor 1 to fibrin. That is the clot that we are talking about. The thrombin here does not only form the fibrin from fibrinogen. It also releases intrinsic factors such as factor 11. It also releases other factors such as factor 5, factor 8, and factor 13. It is the factor 13 which acts upon the fibrin strands to form a fibrin mesh in order to stabilize this platelet plug which has been formed during the primary hemostasis. That will make that fibrin or blood clot sturdy. That is the secondary hemostasis. Now, it is very important that blood clot forms in order to stop bleeding. However, it is also important to regulate coagulation. And this occurs in the so-called negative feedback, which I will discuss in the next video. Thank you.